Hello everyone and welcome to the Activist Lawyer Podcast. My name is Sarah Henry and I'm your host to this podcast, which offers a platform for lawyers to share their story and their journey into law and activism. Our guests will discuss the challenges and highlights of their work, as well as important cases, opinions on legal and political matters, and will offer up advice and tips for anyone interested in pursuing a career in human rights law, public interest law, or criminal justice. The Activist Lawyer Podcast is brought to you by the Granite Podcast Studio. Thank you so much for listening. Today I am joined by solicitor Jack Murphy, who works with McIvor, Farrell Solicitors in Belfast. And we talk about really a broad range of human rights areas. There's a lot in this episode to go through. We talk about Jack's representation of Raymond McCord Sr in the long-running campaign for an Article 2 compliant public inquiry into his son's murder. We talk about challenging unlawful housing decisions affecting refugees and also, very interestingly, social housing, tenancy, succession issues. So really discussing kind of the emotional realities of working on these really challenging human rights cases. We also look at prisoner rights, very important to Jack's work, and cultural dignity following a case that led to Irish language books being permitted in Maghaberry Prison. Also very importantly as well in looking at the pressures facing access to justice and legal aid, and also the wider impact of housing and homelessness litigation. So Jack is director of the Belfast Homeless Services. So we talk about his interaction with that organisation and the impact that has on his work as well. There's also great advice here for aspiring lawyers who would like to get into this area of work and see how the law is really used through Jack's work as a tool for social change, which is really important to kind of the concept of this podcast in general. So this is a really good episode for that advice. So lots in today's discussion. I hope you enjoy it. And please remember to like, share and review where possible. Hello everybody and welcome to the Activist Lawyer Podcast. Today I'm delighted to be joined in studio by Jack Murphy from McIvor Farrell Solicitors. Jack, welcome to the podcast studio. Great to have you here.
Thank you very much, sir. It's a privilege to be here. Thank you.
Okay, well, we've had a little chat before we started recording. Kind of know a few similar people from the same area, went to the same primary school, which I just found out, which is big news. So really, we'll go back in time a little bit, not too far back in time, despite your very vast CV and casework experience, just to tell us maybe how you got involved in law. Where did it all begin? Who or what inspired you?
Yeah, so I grew up in Newry, like yourself, South Armagh, Levy, that area. So at the Clog Primary School, then went on to St Coleman's. But really, first I always was interested in reading. So I loved history, Irish history, that kind of thing. So even from a very young age, I was reading all the time about those kind of topics. And so then went to the college and studied history and politics and religion for A level. And then after that, though, I went out and I took a few years out. I was working on building sites and everything, so it was for a couple of years. But I always still had that in the back of my head that I wanted to go back and, be a lawyer as such. So I went to the Southern Regional College, the Tech, just round the corner, and I done an adult access course, which was I think it's a brilliant initiative for anyone that's maybe out of university or out of secondary school for a bit that want to go back to college as such. Yeah. So I did that, and then the teaching in there was amazing. And I went to Queen's University, studied law with politics, and it was brilliant as well. So, and then I was able, very luckily enough, to get my foot in the door. I think it was in my second year, I think it was this summer, I was able to get an internship or work experience with Phoenix Law in Belfast with Dara Mackin. And that's, it was really hands-on through straight into, serious trials, going to even police interviews and seeing brilliant work being done on the ground and meeting clients. And that's where I really had the first experience of actual work, and I thought it was brilliant. So that's kind of how, and then obviously I graduated from Queen's, then I went and I was working for a corporate firm. I was doing document review. Didn't really ever think that was for me as such. No. I thought it's obviously excellent work, but I always had a passion for human rights and criminal defence and that kind of line of work. So I went then after that and I joined a human rights firm in Belfast, worked there for a while as well, and then I interviewed with Paul Farrell and Ciara Maguire in McIvor Farrell, And I will always remember the first time I spoke to them, they were saying, look, we may look small on the outside, but we're mighty as such, so they punch way above their weight, and I knew that. And then obviously I was very, very lucky to get the job with that firm, and still there now today. I'd done my apprenticeship with them. I just qualified in September there, and actually was just admitted to the role last Friday. So we had our walk across the stage last week with the lady chief there as well, so that was brilliant. But no, and then now I'm in McIvor Farrell at the minute, so and it's amazing work they do. They, across such a wide spectrum of law, and it's the type of law that I wanted to do always. The human rights, the defending people. That's really what it was, and I think it stems from coming from my background from Clog, and with my granny and my granddad always said to me, if you can do something that you can help your community or help people, and fortunate now that I've actually made it there as such, Sometimes you have to, like getting in a podcast studio, I didn't think it would, you'd ever be something like this here,
In the heart of Newry.
In the heart of Newry, yeah, it's brilliant.
Yeah. Well, we have produced some very reputable, formidable lawyers from this area, so we should be very, very proud of it.
Definitely.
And it's fantastic to have you here. And despite you only qualifying quite recently as a solicitor, people would be shocked when they look at your CV and the outline of your work experience, which I have done, because it is vast. And I was thinking, is this guy well advanced into his career? Like, obviously, I know that you just, but it's the amount of work experience that you have had to date.
Yes.
We're
very lucky, to work on some really, really massive cases.
We'll go into some of your work, but McIvor Farrell as well. We've had Kieran. Kieran was one of our very first guests, I think, on the podcast going back 5 years ago, maybe 4.5 years ago, and already talking about the firm at that stage, the fantastic cases that you were involved in. With the Raymond McCord case that we'll get into today. I know that's still ongoing and you're very much involved in that. But give us an idea maybe of, just in general, your current kind of workload and the cases that you're working on. Is there any specific area that you've honed in on? Or is it more of a general kind of human rights and criminal justice approach?
That's basically, you practice across those kind of public law and human rights litigation as such. So I do a lot of prison law, I do a lot of housing, do legacy cases, criminal defence, do inquests, and I also do immigration. So it's really all kind of cases whereby the state has absolute power as such, and we're defending individuals who have nothing really. That's kind of the niche area whereby you're always trying to protect people's rights, and that's the kind of work that we're doing at the minute, and we're blessed to do that kind of work. I think it's really rewarding. Especially it's very difficult. So a lot of times you don't get any results at all because you're going up against the state, but when you get those victories, they're massive. For clients. I'm
glad to hear that you're doing immigration, because we know this part of the world is facing an absolute crisis when it comes to accessing representation and justice for clients who need urgent and valuable immigration advice. So that's good that that's something that you're also doing. Article 2. Now we've very particular to this part of the world again, and we've discussed it very broadly and in respect of very specific important cases in the north, and you are working on this in relation to the Raymond McCord Sr case, which is a public inquiry matter. Can you maybe take us through that as an example of your work? And I know it's quite live at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah. No, it is. It's ongoing even for decades really, and it's really, so Article 2 really, and this is where it stems from as such. So it doesn't just protect life, it requires the state to properly investigate where they themselves may be involved in the death, and look, that's been proven. So the Raymond McCord case is obviously, his son was brutally and tragically murdered in 1997 by the UVF. It transpired through Operation Ballast. It was a report by Nuala Alone at the time. It was the very first time, I believe, in terms of collusion was ever exposed. So that report itself is hugely important still to this day. That's where that's an example of Article 2 in its prime as such, where it actually has worked. Where somebody as fearless as Nuala Alone went in as the police ombudsman and investigated these murders and found that the state, these were all state agents that were involved in this. They were paid state agents in that murder. And from that date, from young Raymond's murder, there was never a proper inquiry into it at all. He's still fighting to this day.
He's fighting for an inquiry, for a public inquiry.
Exactly, he's fighting for a public inquiry. So that's what we were in court recently. We've sought this, And the delay is just ongoing. It's horrendous. That's the loss of a son in such a brutal way, but then the state, with withholding justice is a huge thing as well. And but Raymond is, an inspirational figure. He's to this day, he's doing cross-community work. He was in Derry there in a secondary school where he had students from America, from the cross community in Ireland, speaking to victims. So victims of Bloody Sunday, himself and a couple other victims who have been impacted massively by the conflict. So he's still doing that while all the time he's still fighting for public inquiry and justice for his son.
I mean, there's so many people in the North who are in similar positions, and you're just always in awe of them, their energy, their determination, and of course they usually have the support of very competent legal teams behind them. But just on that, I mean, firstly, I suppose that's a very complex matter as well. And, you obviously work very closely with Raymond and others. How do you kind of balance that kind of emotional toll potentially and acting for families in legacy cases? It must be challenging.
It is challenging, but I think many of your other guests have said they work in that kind of field that, it becomes more than a just client relationship. You become friends. Like I would speak to Raymond, every week, maybe sometimes daily. And that, his drive and that kind of passion for it feeds into ourselves, when we're working for him, and you have that extra kind of push to fight for him, and but it's very difficult because you're seeing people going to court, so many times, and just not getting anywhere, and they're trained and they're getting older, and that's the thing. You're afraid of them never seeing justice, and that's and then it's passed on to that intergenerational trauma type thing, that is obviously hugely real, and but that is the fact. It's emotional work, but it's rewarding. You keep fighting, you get those small victories, and that's what we do it for, is for them to try and get proper justice.
So with that case, where are we in terms of the public inquiry, or do you expect to? We're
waiting on judgment in relation, or a direction as such from the High Court in regards to it. So we've sought leave in that case, seeking a public inquiry. So we've asked our senior counsel, Martin O'Rourke, has asked the court not to sit in their hands, said grant leave and allow the case to progress, and for us to try and achieve a public inquiry. Like obviously we've seen in relation to Pat Finucane, where that's been ordered, the likes of Sean Brown, those types of cases, there's public inquiries being sought in those, and even alongside Raymond's case, there's other families there as well that are, in this. There was a number of other legal teams there with their clients, and they're all families who are when we were in the court that day, you're looking at them, they're all in the same boat, they're all fighting to try and get inquiries and justice. It's
depressing at times to just hear, and when you're going back 30, 40, 50 years in time, and this is still going on.
It's it's depressing, because Raymond's case was one of those that was affected by the guillotine as such, so he had an inquest, but it was never going to get off the ground because of the amount of documentation that probably had to be PII as such, so they would have had to look through all of that, and it just was never going to get to that stage. So we say that the only Article 2 compliant way to get justice is a public inquiry. It's so important.
Well, we wish Raymond and your team and yourself the best of luck with that, and we'll watch with bated breath. Another area that I'm really interested in that you work in is refugee housing. Well, housing in general, I think. But also this kind of priority need challenge. And I know you recently acted for a Palestinian refugee in a successful challenge to the Northern Ireland Housing Executive regarding priority need accommodation. So this case and others really highlight, and I didn't realise the extent of the situation here. It's so bad in terms of housing for vulnerable people in these unlawful assessments. What does this tell us? What does that case reflect about the system, and how are people treated, and what are you seeing?
Well, I acted for a Palestinian refugee who recently just came to the north, obviously fleeing the genocide that's in his home country. Still had family members over there, so he was very, very worried about them all the time. So then he was homeless as such, so he applied to the housing executive, to be assessed as a priority need. They refused that, shockingly, in my view. So we made detailed representations on his behalf then, and they accepted that decision was unlawful as such, and referred it back then for a fresh determination. That was a brilliant result for him, and we're now obviously still actively trying to help him to get a house in the north. So, but they have huge barriers. So they're coming here, fleeing from a conflict. There's language barriers, there's cultural barriers, there's trauma obviously from being displaced, and then they're having to do this house, to apply to get a home and everything else, and they're just being knocked back by the state.
And then you have to go to court. I mean, it feels like this should be a last resort, but it's almost the first step in all of these cases to engage a lawyer, and really it shouldn't be if we had a proper framework for rights here. And I know that's what we've been fighting for years, and it seems to just fall on deaf ears for years now. But it just is symptomatic of the system in place that the first port of call almost is get a lawyer. And so well done in that case. But what does it mean then? Is there anything in terms of strategy wise that this has an impact on?
In terms of strategy wise, we believe that there was a policy change now, or there is a policy change now in place whereby I think that the housing bodies are now seeing that they've made mistakes in their assessment especially for refugees. So I've spoken to colleagues in housing rights, and they've said that they're seeing more applications just being accepted as priority need, which is rightly so, because they should be assessed as that. So we've seen a strategic or policy change within, which I think is a positive move by the housing bodies. You said there correctly, they shouldn't have to come to us to do this. It should be they should be assessed correctly in the first place. There should be no delay. The people shouldn't be then, they've already enough on their plate. They've fled a war torn country. They shouldn't have to be come over here and state that they should be assessed as a priority need for homelessness. In my view, strategically, the housing. I think there's a housing crisis in the north. It's disgraceful. So we act for a huge number of clients, the most vulnerable in our society in terms of their financial, their mental health background, all of those types of things in regards to social housing. So there's obviously an issue in terms of succession.
I know you've been working on that with succession rights and social housing and eviction cases.
That's exactly it. So that's where one of the social housing tenant dies, and the question then becomes of who can succeed or such inherit that tenancy. So it's governed by very strict, and we say very restrictive statutory rules. So in many cases, family members who've lived in their home for years, sometimes decades, find themselves with no legal right to remain, and they're effectively made homeless by the death of a parent.
Okay, I was going to so if somebody, the parent, the person whose house is...
Granda, or anything like that there. So
if the house is in their name, basically, essentially, under the social housing scheme. Right?
Exactly. So the rules around succession, they've been significantly, we say, tightened over time. In many cases, only one succession is permitted. So meaning that if the tenancy is already passed, no further succession is possible, regardless of circumstances of those living there. So you've adults, children caring for elderly parents, partners in long-term relationships, people with deep roots in that community, in that home. They've lived there for decades, and then they've lost their loved one, and then they get a letter through the door basically saying, you're going to have to go here, you're going to have to leave. And we say that is legally wrong. And just this week we've sent a pre-action letter challenging those rules again. So we're seeking to bring that to the High Court and challenge that, because we say it's not compatible with Article 8.
Article 8, I was just going to say, and proportionality as well.
Exactly.
Gosh, that's really...
some of the cases are horrific in terms of people have already serious mental health issues, and they've lost their loved one, and now they've the threat of losing their home that they've maybe lived in for their whole life. They've never been anywhere else, and we say that there's also a wider part of this as well. It feeds into the state, the executive as such, even failing to build adequate social housing. Even in their programme of government, they've said that they've set a target. They fail to do that all the time. There's not enough social housing. So then public bodies like the Housing Executive and Radius, all those types of housing bodies, have to use these secession policies straight away to try and get people off the waiting list. But by evicting somebody, you're putting another person back on the list. So it's just a never-ending cycle of misery as such,
It's another crisis. But that's really interesting work that you're doing within that. And I know this is very close to your heart. We'll circle back to this piece on homelessness well in a moment, because I know it's something that you're very much involved with within your work and outside of it. But getting back to another very particular area of your work, which is very interesting. I know you've been working on this for a very long time, and you've written extensively on it too. It's prisoner.
Prison law, yes.
Prison law.
Yeah.
And obviously one of your cases resulted in a policy change allowing Irish language books, which is very interesting, into Maghaberry Prison. And beyond the immediate outcome, what did the case represent in terms of cultural rights? This is a very interesting one, and the dignity for prisoners. And just before we get on to the more general issues around prison law and the work that's arising from that, that was quite a specific one around the Irish language.
Yes, no, it was a very interesting case. It's still actually ongoing as well now. So so I'll even tell you from the start of it. So our client, I went down and consulted with him, and he is an avid Irish language speaker. He actually teaches loyalists, he teaches Republicans, he teaches people that are not of any political persuasion. So he's in there
in prison.
And he's actually told me as well that, you know, some prison guards are interested even in trying to learn Irish language. I don't know if the prison establishment would like that, but that's a different point. But no, but his work, what I thought is excellent, because it's bringing together all those different communities, and while they're in prison, and they're bettering themselves, they're rehabilitating. You know, that's my view, is the purpose of prison. So he's doing that. But he told me, he said there was, like Jack, he said to me that there's no Irish language books in the library as such. There's loads of other languages, which is brilliant, but the language native to this country, there's there's a stark lack of it as such.
Yeah.
So then we wrote to them, and we wrote to the prison and asked them, and we wrote to the DOJ. And fair enough, to be fair to the client, he was actually writing to Stormont himself as well before he'd even instructed me, so he was doing great work in that regard. But then we had wrote to them, and then they accepted that there was no real procurement, you know, set up, you know, for the library as such, and they accepted there was an issue. They wanted to work with us, so they were saying, look, this is the policy, we're going to do this, we're going to help you, we're going to. They obviously could see the benefits of it as such, but that was brilliant. We thought that was going to be excellent, but since that, our client instructs that nothing further really has done. So it's all well and good on paper saying they're going to do it. They haven't done it. So we've actually again sent another pre-action letter in relation to that. We've had a response, so we're reviewing that now. So we're seeking to see if we have to take that case to the High Court as such, to advocate for the Irish language in the prison, you know. So it's very, very interesting.
It's very interesting, but it also is a bit shocking.
Yeah. I found that as well, that just the you know, I don't know if it was deliberate, I can't say that, and we speculate in relation to the lack of it, especially when there was other languages really well documented as such, you know.
Anyway, nothing surprises us here anymore, does it? No. And just more broadly speaking, in terms of prison law, what other issues are arising? I don't think we've covered this in any kind of great depth here, but you know, in terms of human rights, let's say.
Yeah, no, so it's a massive, I think in the north anyway, it's a massive area of law. I think that it's not really well advertised as such. So I first got into it when I was paralegal in a human rights firm in Belfast. I was thrown in the deep end. I think it's brilliant the way that, you know, firms like that do that. Mm-hmm. You have to get stuck in. You're down first. You're in Maghaberry Prison. You're going to see prisoners, and it's kind of daunting at the start of it. You don't know what to expect. But I've been there now hundreds of times, and you know, you're going in there, and you're seeing again hugely vulnerable people. Obviously they're in there, but a vast majority of them are on remand, so they're not even convicted. So that, you know, so that's another issue. But anyway, even the ones that are convicted, they still, in my view, have human rights. They still should be protected. So you're going in there and you're speaking to people who maybe have serious, again, mental health issues, addiction, you know, and trauma, you know, victims of past abuses perpetrated by others and the state against them. So and then they have huge amount of issues. So they'll be seeking their medication. They're not getting proper health care. You know, that's a huge topic that comes up all the time, whereby we have prisoners there who are seeking addiction care. So they're seeking to get the medication to try and stop them from taking drugs as such. And because there's a huge waiting list. They're suffering massively. They're going through withdrawals. You know, you're talking to people who are unfortunately self-harming and trying to take their own life and everything else. It's very, very difficult work, but it's very important. And so we're litigating and we're trying all the time to protect their rights and trying to say to the prison and the trust who represent who have lawful authority over their healthcare to do their jobs. You know, there's I've wrote, I think as well, in relation to the activist lawyer, I wrote a piece a couple of years ago in relation to the opioid crisis within the prison, and that's one that's still ongoing, massively ongoing. That the people are waiting. I got a client there 3 years without addiction care. We only just recently got him onto the Subutex is an opioid addiction medication where it helps with his addiction issues. But 3 years we fought to try and get him on that. So he went on hunger strike. He was self-harming. All of these things were happening because of that. And that's, again, another issue of resources and not putting enough money into things that need to be done. Like, if we want society to be better, we need to rehabilitate those that we've locked away as such. Are they going to come out even in a worse state than they went in? And that's just my view. But I think that we're going to have a never-ending cycle of crime. Unless we treat the main causes of it. So that's addiction. Give them proper mental health care. Those kind of things are crucial, but it's not being done, and that's where our role in prison law comes in. That we have to do that.
That's huge, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I know, you've been working on that for a number of years. So thank you for sharing that. I didn't realise the extent of the issue. Just maybe kind of more, again, we spoke a little bit about you doing immigration there. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on access to justice generally here and the pressures around legal aid. Because I know you work with legal aid and we've had so many people on here. It's still an ongoing crisis is the way to describe it. Yeah. How are you finding it in terms of your work, and how does it hamper you and others? I'm sure there's so many solicitors now that just can't do this work because of legal aid. Well,
that's it. Especially the succession cases there as well. That many firms won't do it because of, the legal aid issues in it, so then you have a lot of people then just without any representation. But it's hugely vital. Like, even last week, we was lucky enough to be admitted to the role, and we the president of the Law Society brilliantly spoke about access to justice and legal aid. He said how important it is. It's vital for society that those without the means have access to justice and have access to representation, because without that, a lot of times you have an adversarial setting whereby the state have all the power and the individual doesn't. You need to have legal aid in place to protect society. Without it, I think we just fall into...
What are we going to do about it? It's because we've heard this so many times, and I know the representative bodies, whether it's the Bar, North and South, the UK as well, say this and how they emphasise how important it is, but we all know that. But what can be done at this stage? I mean, I know there were strikes in the South around this issue for criminal barristers, and that's still ongoing. What can be done? Because it's really...
Well, I think that the immigration lawyers done excellent work. They had done it together. I think they went and, they've obviously worked together and advocated like hell, really, to improve legal aid for immigration cases. They were obviously in a dire state. They're not great now, but they're up. They've improved slightly. So that's, I think that, lawyers, we have to continue doing that. We have to just go to the Department of Justice, go to Naomi Long and say, look, this is the dire state. You need to make action now because people will suffer, in terms of it. So even going back in the terms of the prison setting, so like we would have clients ringing saying, again, even there, just this week, one of my clients, his grandfather tragically passed away. He wanted to go to the funeral. He was told actually by the prison he wanted to get compassionate temporary release before his granddad died. He was told by somebody within the prison that his granddad wasn't ill enough. I don't know who made that decision. Was it a medical expert? We don't know that because we haven't got any answers yet. But we sent then an emergency pre-action letter. They haven't even given a decision. Firstly, asked him to make a decision, and we've asked him as well to allow him to go there. But that there kind of issue as well. So that's an urgent thing. Legal aid then seek us to have our client sign a legal aid form, right? This may be simple, right? But it just means that there's no way that I can get down to the prison to get him to do that in a matter of hours. These are the urgent things. So say as well, somebody's ringing saying they're going to take their own life, they're not getting their medication. We have to write straight away. And you can't get legal aid in place within that time. So there has to be a rethink, I think, in that kind of thing, whereby, those kind of old ways of you have to get a form signed to process a legal aid application. This is urgent, it has to be done today in this minute, or else something's tragic, like an Article 2 implication of it, whereby somebody's own life could be taken because of it. So there is a crisis in legal aid, and it's been talked about for years, and I don't think it's going away anytime soon. But I think we still have to, as lawyers, have to band together and fight for
collective action. It's in a dire state, as you said. Well, looking back at your career to date, and there is plenty more to come from you, has there been anything that really stands out for you in terms of whether it's experience or a successful case or a particular client that you've worked in that you really look back and think,
Yeah, well, there's a number of different ones that did one. One that stands out really, one of the first clients I met when I went to McIvor Farrell. Again, Paul Farrell, excellently, they allow you to, you have great responsibility straight away, you know what I mean, to speaking to clients. And I went and met the family of the late Jason Weir, who tragically took his own life in Maghaberry Prison in February 2021. So I met the family of Jason and took instructions about that inquest case. And then from that date, I was involved the whole way through a charge of it, right till we had a 4-day hearing in Armagh courthouse, an inquest in front of a full jury. We had then, obviously the jury delivered its findings, and they stated that there was errors and omissions by the prison healthcare that contributed to his death. And when I read the case file, you seen that from the very first day. It's a very tragic case, but it's one that sticks out in my mind, that whereby, you see the power of, again, Article 2, a proper inquiry into a death. So Jason's family always felt that he was let down. It was clear that he was, and they were vindicated for that in their pursuit of justice for him by the findings of a jury of their peers. So that really one has always stood out to me. The findings were only in October there last year, but it was very, very powerful experience, very traumatic at times, but again, you build a relationship with clients that become, you speak to them all the time, and it was a tough one, but it's one that stands out, and I think it's the power of what we can do, and I thought that was one of the most standout ones in my career so far.
And so early on in your career as well, which I suppose set the path for you for, the work that came after that, and it's a great experience, and it's not easy.
No, sometimes it's difficult,
Yeah, it has to be. But the housing cases that you mentioned there are harrowing as well, very, very difficult cases to work on, and they really highlight and emphasize the need for kind of a robust framework of rights. I mean, to have lawyers grappling with legal aid and fighting for minor and major issues just seems to be where we're at the moment, and it doesn't seem to be going away soon. But issues around homelessness
kind of crisis area as well. We've seen there, even just the media reporting that I think the money they're spending on emergency accommodation is massive, 40 million or something like that, the Irish News reported. But again, that links back to the failure of the state to build adequate social housing. There's so many people on the street in Belfast, all over the north,
So it feeds into that. But you are also, outside of work, you're a director of Belfast Homeless Services, and you're involved in many campaigns, whether that's seeking public inquiries into homelessness-related deaths, among other issues. So on top of the work that you do this as well. Firstly, I mean, can you let us know why and how you got into that, and maybe how do you think it's important that lawyers kind of step outside their day-to-day work and maybe involve themselves in the community, or maybe they're already doing that through their work? How valuable is that?
Belfast Homeless Services is an amazing charity based in Belfast. So like a drop-in centre whereby it's a safe space really for those unfortunate enough to be on the street, can come and have a nice place to sit and get something to eat, and you can signpost them to places, about housing. The volunteers who are really the main people in it, they're the ones, they're doing daily, directors, all well and good, we help out, but it's the ones on the ground, that the likes of Liz Rocks, who's really, amazing. That's who actually asked me to come on board, because it feeds in again to inquests as such. So there was a huge amount of deaths one time on the streets of Belfast linked to homelessness and addiction and mental health. And I was instructed by the family of Patrick McIlroy. He was in prison in Maghaberry, released, and I think it was only a few days later, died tragically in a public toilet on the street of a drug overdose. And I then, very, very, again, brilliant relationship with that family. We then took that case on, we advocated for an inquest, and now we have one. So we're in the process of it. We're preliminary hearings. We're fighting for justice for him, because we say his family contend that he was in the prison, he didn't get proper addiction care, he was released, he died of an overdose. It shows the direct link of that.
Causation goes back to
That's it. And there's no safety net for vulnerable prisoners. They're just sometimes released out into the street, and there's nothing. They're given a bag and a few pounds to get to Belfast or wherever it is, and they're dumped onto the street, and forget about them. And it's an absolute disgrace. And so that's how I got involved. Then was advocating for a number of families then in terms of who died on the street. So Liz knew all these families because these people were coming into Belfast Homeless Services. They were her friends, you know what I mean, and they knew them well. And she was very affected by that. So I built a relationship with Liz, and we were fighting for justice for those families and those people who passed away. And then she asked me would I come on board the board. And I joined in January 2023, so 3 years now, last month. And, it's the work that the board do as well. Obviously, the volunteers, I think, are the main part of it, but the board, the likes of James McGinn and Claire Crummy, and there's other Fiona Green, who's actually the CEO of NACRO as well. They are all, and there's others on the board as well. They all do amazing work and advocate for the homeless in Belfast. But I think, in terms of lawyers, outside of it, I think we do have a part to play, We can challenge decisions, but I think the community work really addresses the human reality behind those decisions. Mm-hmm. So I think that we should really, if we can, obviously it's difficult. People, have massive commitments outside of their work, but I just feel passionate about it. I was privileged, and I'm always privileged to be on part of that board and part of that charity, and to see it grow, and it's amazing. Yeah. But again, it's one of those things. It shouldn't really be there. We shouldn't have to have a homeless charity as such. We should, in 2026, there's enough resources, in my view, in the state has at their disposal to sort that issue, but clearly they don't want to do that. And look, these brilliant charities exist because of that.
It's tough, isn't it?
Yeah.
And just on that, I mean, so your work is already challenging enough, but enjoyable, because I know you're very, very passionate about it. And we spoke about that before we started recording. You have to have that passion in you for this type of work. And if you don't, you're not going to. But I'm wondering, your Clog, Cleavy man, GAA territory?
I did, for years when I was younger, and now a wee bit older. And I went back actually to seconds played for the rival team, Killian. But it was only one season at that. But no, I played the whole way through when I was younger and loved it, and that kind of thing's brilliant. But you do need to switch off as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm getting at, is that you very, very often find that anybody working on these kind of challenging cases, do you switch off? And a lot of local solicitors and regional solicitors, they're heavily involved in sport outside of their work. So how do you find that? Do you think you can achieve, or often achieve, this notion of work-life balance, if that even exists?
I don't know. It's very difficult. I think that, like, sometimes, I at the weekends you would go and you obviously spend time with your girlfriend or whatever, and your friends, and I think that's brilliant. I can do that. I can go and enjoy myself and whatever else. But you still in the back of your head, like sometimes I would be in the house, or you'd be sitting thinking, and then boom, something, an idea or a case would come into your head, and you would start working on it straight away. So it's always in the background. You know what I mean? I think that's just part and parcel of the job. But I enjoy it. Like, I think it's very empowering. I think it's rewarding. It's difficult though, but like, you would encourage, I think, anyone to do that. If they have a passion for it, to try and just get stuck into it.
To get stuck in. Well, that leads us to our final question, which is about advice and any tips that you have for any of our listeners who would be interested in getting involved in your type of work.
Yeah, well, so I didn't, like many others, didn't really do the traditional route as such. I didn't go straight after Queen's. I went out and had a bit of life experience as such. I was working on sites, I was doing different jobs and different things like that there, but I always had in my mind to go back to the law, and that's what I did through that access course. So, like, if you're out and you've always had an idea of that you wanted to go back and do something like that, there's options there. You can go to do an adult access course. You can go to university. No matter what age you are, you can still go back and do it. You can do, so there's no cut-off point in that regard. And anyone looking to try and get into human rights law, I would say, study it, read it, look at the cases. They're in the media all the time. Really important cases, read about it, and then if you can, go and try and get. I know it's very difficult to get work experience, but just, if you do, just put the pressure onto them. Try and say even a day, an hour, or whatever it is, and just let me get the foot in the door and then get stuck into it, because that's what they'll do. They'll throw you in the deep end,
and you'll know if you like it very soon.
Sink or swim, as
exactly.
such, and it's brilliant. So I would advocate for human rights and our kind of criminal defence, all of that kind of work, to anyone. The corporate stuff is excellent, and that it plays its role, but I would always advocate for our type of work.
Well, look, you've shared a little bit of your work today. We've probably so many more cases that we could go into, but hopefully we'll have you back for an update at some point.
Oh, I'd love to.
And we're delighted to follow your work and to finally have you in the studio, because we've been in contact a little bit back and forth through Activist Lawyer platform, and I know you've written pieces for us as well. So it's great to catch up and learn a little bit more about this vital work. I mean, it's hugely important.
Same to yourself. I think this podcast is doing vital work, highlighting our work and showing to people who want to try and get into it, the importance of it. Because I've been listening from the very start. You said Kieran O'Hara, I listened to his podcast when I think I was only joined the firm at the time, and then all the other excellent lawyers that we have here in this jurisdiction you've had on since. My friend Jeremy Bratnell, I listened advocaately to his podcast and on others before that. But no, I think you do excellent work, and this is a brilliant podcast. I definitely listen to it all the time anyway.
Thank you so much, and you're welcome back anytime.
Thank you.
And so thank you for joining us today, Jack. And yes, let's stay in touch.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for joining me today. If you like the show, please remember to share and leave a review if you have a moment. And you can also check out our website, www.activistlawyer.com, where you will see some blog articles written by our guests and contributors, as well as some fabulous Activist Lawyer merchandise.
This podcast was recorded in Granite Podcast Studio. Interested in starting up your own podcast but don't know how? Granite Podcast Studio can help. Record your podcast in our state-of-the-art studio, which is based in the heart of Newry City. Our studio has cutting-edge and user-friendly technology and can seat up to 4 people. We also provide an editing service for our team, using your guidance and editing notes to provide you with a flawless finished product, leaving your listeners wanting more. For more information on how you can get started, visit www.granitepodcaststudio.com.